Okay, well, great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight for Sustainable Claremont's Dialogue series. Tonight we have gardening with California native plants, and I have a couple of very brief announcements before we get to our speakers. So let me go ahead and get through some of those here really quickly. A couple of events that we have upcoming. One is we have an urban foraging workshop coming on September 25th. That's a Sunday, a couple of weeks from now. And that's with a professor from Cal Poly, who's going to be taking us through neighborhoods in Claremont, learning about foraging the local bounty that we have in our front yards and in parks and on campuses. So it should be a lot of fun. My colleague, Han, is going to drop the link to all these things in the chat box. But if you have any questions about anything that we mentioned here today, please feel free to reach out to us to get any links that you might have missed. And they're all also on our website. Second quick thing is we do have our annual gala coming up. It feels far away, but it's October 10th, which is not too far from now. Again, tickets for that are going to be going on sale in a couple of weeks here, so keep your eye out for that. We have our second annual Green Home Tour. Last year we did this virtually, and this year we're going to be doing it in person on Sunday, November 6th. We have a lot of really great, very sustainable homes in the Claremont community that we're going to be opening up in a open house style tour that we'll be offering to the community, kind of like the Claremont Heritage Home Tour, but with sustainability as the focus. Cal BG's Grow Native Nursery is going to be opening up pretty soon on October 15th. And it's going to be opening up early for members of Cal BG, so please be aware of that. This year, the nursery is only going to be open on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so always can keep an eye on that from Cal BG's website. They're also doing a series of workshops related to what we're talking about tonight with Scott. They have an upcoming workshop on transforming your front yard from a lawn to a native garden. All of their workshops can be accessed, again, in the link that Han will go ahead and drop in the chat box here in a second. And everything that we talk about can be sent to your email box in our newsletter. So if you're not already on our newsletter list, please consider joining. That way, any of these events, these workshops, our gala, the tour, all this stuff will be brought to you so that you don't forget and that you can get your tickets and join us at these great in-person events that we have. Finally, sustaining these dialogues. So we try to put on as many of these as we can throughout the year. And by donating to Sustainable Claremont and helping us put more on, we're always so grateful for that. So please consider making a donation to Sustainable Claremont and help our programs grow. One more quick announcement here. So we are partnering with Clean Power Alliance and Energy Upgrade California to do outreach for the Power Saver Rewards program. You might have noticed that last week there was a flex alert, which means that the grid is being taxed by, or there's a strong demand on the grid for power. And these flex alerts go out when individual consumers can make small changes in their energy use so that we avoid rolling blackouts. One of the other outreach efforts that we do for Energy Upgrade California is about their Power Saver Rewards program. So this is a program that rewards you, Californians, when you reduce energy use during those flex alerts that just happened. And you can earn rewards through powersaverrewards.org. So you go on that website and you register. Registering is free. There's no penalty for not reducing your energy during a flex alert. Trying to spread the word on this to get to more people who can save power, and so that we can, responsibly use power during these hot summer months when the demand is so high. So please consider going to powersaverrewards.org and signing up. And again, if you have any questions about that program, you can reach out to myself or Han, my colleague, at outreach@sustainableclaremont.org. Okay, so enough about that. A quick introduction to our speaker tonight, who has a lot more to say, but Scott Kleinrock, he's a conservation program manager at the Waterwise Community Center. Scott's waving in the window at the Chino Basin Water Conservation District, just right down the road from us. So Scott's going to talk to us about a lot of topics tonight, which I'm excited to hear about and which I think are particularly relevant during these hot summer months when we're in such a drought. So Scott, I'm going to go ahead and make you host so you can share your screen, and I'm going to throw it to you.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to juggle some windows really quickly. Here, share my screen. Start the show. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Kleinrock, Conservation Programs Manager here at the Waterwise Community Center, which is our public-facing name for a lot of the work we do at the Chino Basin Water Conservation District. Before we jump into it, I'll tell you, for those of you who haven't heard of us, just a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are a special district, so we are similar sort of structurally to a school district or a fire district within California, but we are very, very small. And we basically were created by a public vote in 1949 to provide water conservation services to essentially the western edge of San Bernardino County. So kind of thinking upland Rancho Cucamonga in the north, down through Montclair, Chino, Ontario, to Chino Hills in the south. And we're called the Chino Basin Water Conservation District because a significant local source of groundwater is this groundwater basin called the Chino Basin. The basin doesn't recognize county boundaries. It actually goes into a little bit into Riverside, a little bit into Los Angeles County. And so some of the other local agencies pull water from it as well. But we, as a special district, are San Bernardino County Special District. And we say that what we do primarily is threefold: percolate, demonstrate, and educate. So you can see here on the right, percolation has long been sort of the bread and butter of what our agency has done. And so if you've noticed some of those big holes in the ground off of the 10 freeway that either after a rain or sometimes almost randomly they fill up with water, those are some of our 8 infiltration basin properties, most of which are literally old gravel pits, which have since been re-engineered to take in water from the channelized storm drain and creek system that would otherwise leave our communities and infiltrate it into our groundwater supply, which through kind of natural processes cleans as it goes down through, and most of them hundreds of feet of sands and gravel. So sort of recapturing a little bit of those ecosystem services that the natural creek bed used to provide, but can't now because it's concreted. But a number of years ago, our board of directors realized that, well, that's great to work with the supply side of water conservation. If on the demand side, water is not being used wisely, then we're missing part of the equation. And so they moved into education and demonstration. So we have about a 3-acre demonstration garden open for free every day of the week except Sunday and major holidays right here in Montclair. So probably within 12 to 15 minutes of where many of you live, I'll show you a website that has the directions later on. So please come visit us, and you can see all sorts of demonstrations of styles of Waterwise gardening, including many of them with California natives, labeled plants, and all that great stuff. And within the education part, we do all sorts of education for all sorts of different groups, from curriculum integrated K through 12 programs to working with local community members on presentations like this. We do lots and lots of longer free workshops all throughout the year, some online, mostly moving back to being in person on Saturday mornings in our demonstration garden. You all are invited. Everything's free. I'll share the schedule with you later on, as well as professional training programs. Easiest way to stay in the loop with everything we do is to sign up for our monthly newsletter at cbwcd.org/newsletter. 1 email a month, no junk. So that's the spiel. And now let's jump into it, because there's a lot that I would love to share with you all. I want, though, to do a quick kind of show of hands reaction in your Zoom, because I'm curious for this audience. Please raise your hand if you already are growing some California native plants at home or in community or any sort of landscape space that you kind of choose what gets planted in. Okay, so a few of you, but not most of you. That's great. So let's talk about this. And we're going to start with a premise. Landscapes take up quite a bit of space in Southern California. It's true that at the ground level, we might feel like there's too much concrete and too much asphalt, and that is the case in many communities. But when you look at even most of those communities from an aerial photo, it's very different than if you're looking at New York City or middle of downtown Los Angeles. And especially within our suburban yards, and especially the suburban front yards, for a long time, the main question that people would ask in their communities is, does my front yard fit in? And if some people wanted to get a little bit more eclectic than that, maybe, really the focus was on what does it look like, was mostly what I heard for many years when I was getting into horticulture and landscaping. And we definitely want to promote beautiful landscapes and front yards in our neighborhoods, walkable communities, spaces that don't look abandoned and that are, great places to be. But the really exciting thing about finding ourselves in this terrible drought, I would never wish for this drought, but really the last couple of droughts have opened up an opportunity for a new question. And that's not just, does it fit in with the neighbors? There are many more different styles of landscapes that are appreciated now. People take out lawns when homes are being flipped to increase curb appeal. Not just what does it look like, but what do our landscapes do? What are they putting back out into the world, either for us or for the wider world? And what's that kind of cost benefit for what we're putting into them? And so this talk and my personal philosophy about working with native plants is not that like we need to plant native plants because we don't have enough water to have lawns anymore, but it's that California native landscapes do more. They do so much more for us and are so much more beautiful and interesting spaces than the conventional styles of landscapes that they replace. So to ground ourselves, what is a California native plant? There are many ways you can define it, but generally it's considered to be a plant that's been here for a very long time, a plant that evolved in California along with the insects, birds, and other animals that did too. And that's something special. And so what makes them special? Well, they're adapted to our conditions as long as we are choosing plants appropriate to where we are. So when people say California native plants, usually that's shorthand for a native plant that makes sense to grow here. I mean, giant sequoias are California native plants. I'm not encouraging you to put one in your yard, but here in inland Southern California, we have so many amazing choices, from plants that were literally local to like right where your property was hundreds of years ago, to plants from our local mountains, a little bit more to the coastal areas, down into Baja California and the Channel Islands. There's many great plants, and a little bit farther east into the true desert. And especially some of those desert plants just thrive in that reflected inland heat. And in the summertime, just can turn that right back into flowers that are amazing habitat for pollinators, like you can see here. The vast majority of the pictures that you'll see in this presentation are ones that were taken in my yard in Pomona. In my plantings in my garden are 3 to 4 years old. So it really is, if you plant it, they will come. And so with that evolution, they have these incredible relationships with other native plants and with all sorts of different animals. So why would we want them in our gardens? Well, let me tell you about an average morning in my yard. And that's not just because I'm a great gardener and my yard is so special. These plants, if you put the right plant in the right place, really for the most part that you're going to see want to grow themselves. And they don't want too much done to them. And most people with just a little bit of learning, which there's plenty of resources for that I will show you, can have success for them. Average morning in my yard, I always, when I teach this kind of topic, these are from other classes, but I just wander out into my garden with a camera, because every season there's something interesting, whether it's color or whether it's later on in the summer where the plant has gone somewhat dormant, but then the seeds are there to provide food for the birds. Pollinator habitat in the spring. Throw in a little bit of water and it just amplifies the effect, and it doesn't need to be expensive. We have a number of bird baths in my partner Kira and my backyard that are just saucers that would go underneath a pot, and we just clean them out and keep the water clean, and the birds love them. You can learn easily about what blooms when. And so, for example, when some plants are kind of dormant in the summer, there's a whole other host of plants like our native buckwheats that are just in full glorious bloom. There's been a lot, fortunately, in the news about monarchs being in decline in habitat. If you plant narrowleaf milkweed in your garden, in this general area, within a year, you'll have monarchs breeding in your garden in the vast majority of cases, and growing your own bird food, providing nectar, and having it all be extremely colorful, if you would like, as you go through that. And it just really is amazing who will show up and how quickly. And so a lot of these pictures were from spring, but even in summer, this year, I'm really watering very little, but I still have, beautiful, beautiful native sunflowers that have gotten no water at all. And so here's some longhorn bees. The boys kind of just find a flower and sleep in them. And early in the morning, you can find them just kind of waking up. Or in the middle of the winter, there's still going to be hummingbirds, and there's seasonal, different birds that show up. The warblers show up in winter, then go back to higher elevations in the summer. There's just so much that will happen in any native garden that just goes so much farther beyond the sort of just like glossy magazine sort of, picture snapshot beauty that you would see, in a garden magazine or on Instagram or something like that. There are really so many more dimensions in a native garden. And it doesn't need to be all or nothing. I love growing fruit trees, my own food as well. You can really have it all. And you could even, if you want to learn a little bit more, learn how to combine some of those different plantings as well. So why would we want them in our garden? Just to kind of review. Beautiful. These are all native plants here that generally, after they're established, water every 3 to 4 weeks in our local communities. And just, as beautiful, if not more interesting than the conventional plants they're replacing, especially because a lot of the native plants have these great drought adaptations. And so, for example, here, Indian mallow has all these fuzzy little silver hairs, and so it just glows in the sunrise or the sunset in a very, very kind of magical and almost impossible to photograph way. And so with that, you get the habitat, and that will bring to your yard everything, especially if you put a little water in, from the little ones all the way up to the big ones. We get hawks not too infrequently in our backyard in Pomona, and get hummingbirds, every single day, constantly throughout the day. And so the resource conservation is important, but to some degree, when I think about the things that make me excited about it, I mean, that's kind of just a byproduct even of all the great reasons to plant native plants. It also lets you or someone that you're potentially hiring to do garden work, work smarter and not harder. Every garden requires care, but certainly compared to the mowing a lawn in conventional landscape, much less frequently. And if you're doing the work yourself, the great part is that most of the actual work, pruning plants, most plants only need to be touched like once, maybe twice a year to be optimally cared for. And most of that happens depending on the plant in the spring or in the fall. So those are the times that it's really nice to be outside for. And all that together makes our yards and our communities really more enjoyable places to live and to learn. So whether that's just for you personally, for kids or grandkids that visit, everyone should get out to the mountains, and some people can, and some people don't make it out, and that's great. And native urban landscapes are no replacement for the wild experience, but you can experience parts of it and a glimpse of it every single morning and every single evening, if you're lucky enough to have a little spot of land where you can decide what's going to be planted there. Or if you're involved in a garden or committees at schools or churches, temples, community areas, it can happen there as well. I really like this quote from Lady Bird Johnson, former First Lady, who was a big proponent of working with native plants. And she said, native plants give us a sense of where we are in this great land of ours. I want Texas to look like Texas and Vermont to look like Vermont. And I'm much more cynical than Lady Bird Johnson, but my thought is, if it costs so much to live in California and I'm lucky enough to have a spot where I can decide what's going to grow there, Why would I want my yard to look like a parched imitation of an East Coast landscape style that really goes back to a rich European landowner kind of flexing that he has so much land he can just have lawn and he doesn't need to grow crops there? I'd much rather trade that in and wake up to the natural beauty of California every day and enjoy it every evening. And when you do that, that's also not just visual. I wish I could have like a scratch and sniff Zoom presentation, because these gardens smell amazing as well. And it gives your cat something interesting to look at. So that's always nice. And it is literally therapeutic. I mean, there is published research now talking about how not only just looking out into green spaces, but looking out into kind of slightly a little bit wilder, kind of more naturalistic green spaces really does have implications for mental health and stress reduction. And so I think with that, I'm kind of going to skip ahead. I knew that I was putting far too many slides into this presentation than I was going to have time for. So let's skip ahead just a few slides. So, okay, that's great. Maybe I've sold you on it. Where do you start? Not at the nursery. That's the biggest idea. Even the really good nurseries I love, like California Botanic Garden. Now, if you just, if you have a little 3-foot wide by 5-foot wide planter and you just need a few plants, sure. Take a picture on your phone, hit up California Botanic Garden, ask someone what are a few good plants. But if you're really thinking about a large yard project, hit up California Botanic Garden later. Perfect time to be really thinking larger right now. You're going to want to start with your goals for your project and then come up with a plan first. So you don't end up buying a bunch of random plants that aren't going to fit well in your space, and then you're cutting things back and you have too many and something needs full sun and you put it in part shade. You can prevent that with a plan. And so what about design? I firmly believe that the average motivated person, with being provided resources that I will share with you in just a moment, can come up with a quite nice and very functional design for themselves. Or there's a few great landscaping companies, very reputable, that kind of specialize in native and waterwise gardens in our local area. And so if you have the inclination and budget to work with one of those companies, you can work with them. But even if you're hiring someone, thinking about your goals, how you want to use the space in addition to having native plants, is super important. And we teach longer workshops and have YouTube videos, and I'll share the links with you soon, about really going into all of this. This slide got kind of unformatted, but one of the big ideas after you have your goals and you kind of start to think about plants is to learn with resources. How do you put the right plant into the right place? That is 85 to 90% of gardening is doing a little bit of research and making sure the plant's going to want to thrive there, getting it going, and then kind of getting it out of the way and not doing overly too much. And so that comes down to understanding sun and shade, drainage, size, and grouping plants with matched water needs. And you can learn how to do that. You don't need to get a graduate degree in landscape architecture to do that. And landscape architecture is my background, and I've worked with some landscape architects that have pretty good reputations, and some of them don't understand this very well either. A little bit of research and you could be just as good as a lot of them. And then what happens then? Then you learn how to care for it. And so how do you get your head around all of that stuff? Well, we made this. It's a website called the Waterwise Garden Planner. And that's what I will share with you now. So this is the Waterwise Garden Planner. It started in a previous iteration as a website called the Inland Valley Garden Planner. That was first iteration and still the main plant search database, and the plant photos and information were a collaboration and really led by Bob Perry, local landscape architect and Claremont resident, who would imagine a number of you had heard his name before. And so he was really interested in finding a way of taking some of the work that he had done over his career, really documenting the plant palette of Southern California as it's moving in this direction, and putting it into a format that's going to be more accessible for more people, than the books that most landscape architects, had on their shelves, but cost $85. And the average homeowner starting to think about this is not really going to go in for that purchase. And so it's gone through a few evolutions to now it's called the Waterwise Garden Planner. And I'm going to show you just a few different sections. So if you want to come back to it, you can understand what there is. So part of the center of it is called the Plant Finder, where you can say you're interested in finding a California native plant. So it's 114 plant profiles. There's a lot more great California native plants, but this is aimed at kind of the beginner or casual gardener, or person that doesn't even want to consider themselves a gardener, but just wants to have, a nice landscape using Waterwise plants. And so I encourage you, I'm very passionate about California natives. If you're thinking about Waterwise landscapes, you might as well have it focused on natives. Doesn't need to be all or nothing. I have a lavender in my yard. My partner makes lavender lemonade occasionally. That's great. But to me, native plants really represent what I would propose to be the new default for working with your landscape. If you don't want to put a fruit tree there because you're going to get that fruit, if you don't have a specific need for a plant in that area, there's going to be native plants that can do anything you want, from shade to color to, a little meadowy area that your kid can learn how to do cartwheels in, that also provide all these additional benefits. So native plant, say it's going to be full sun. Maybe you are looking for a tree, a shade tree for that area. In the middle of summer, we all wish we have more shade. And, maybe you want to make sure that that shade tree is also going to be great for butterflies. Then our 5 top plants, or maybe not necessarily a tree, but you want a shrub. So then that's going to be for butterflies, our 18 top plants. Out of all these potential plants that you could grow, hundreds or thousands of plants for this area, these are our top ones. And you can look through, see these kind of factors that help you know, is it going to be the right plant for the right place? The sun exposure, roughly the water needs, the height, the width, you can see an image. And then for every single one of these, you can get a full plant profile where you can see many different photos of the plant, understand their properties, their kind of, when they're mature, their watering schedules. There's some additional links to help you make sense of that part, and then how to care for them once they're in the ground. And so that's basically the Plant Finder. If you want to create a login, the only person who has access to your email information is me, and I have better things to do than to share that with anyone else. So it's, you're not going to get a bunch of junk mail. You can do that, and then you could save your different plant lists as you work on different ideas or different projects. And so that's the Plant Finder. But we also had a lot of requests from people who want some ideas of, like, how can they start? They don't necessarily want to create their own custom plant palette, or maybe they'll add some things in, but really, what's a good cohesive group of plants that they can emulate? And so after working one-on-one with lots of local residents in our service area, we realized that people generally don't want an infinite number of different things when it comes to the plant portion of their yard. And most of them grouped pretty closely along these 8 themes. And so we created these 8 templates. This one is a very popular one, and my favorite, the Butterfly and Songbird Garden. And so for each of these, you can explore the design example, where we created example plans for extra large, large, medium, and small front yards. You can use them for backyards too, but most people, when they're just getting into this, are looking to do their front yard first. And so each of them has a pretty condensed plant list. So here you can see grass just jumped to the top for some reason, but an ornamental grass. But most of them have 1 or 2, small trees. Here we have 3. A few shrubs that some are great for sun, some if you have part shade, some taller shrubs, some smaller, but that all will work well together as long as you put, the right plant, right place sort of stuff, and some colorful perennial plants. And so basically everything you need, and you don't necessarily need to use all of them, and you can bring in some other ones. And then we have kind of these design examples. So the extra large ones have these patio spaces as well. And even if you don't have an extra large space, you can kind of get different ideas from different spaces and different views. Some of them you can hover and then jump directly to the plant profile. But all of these kind of rendering styles, if you like that look, for example, for this, maybe it looks too dense for some people, but you can kind of make your own less plant dense version. I'm a fan of the kind of dense, wild look personally, but different things for different people, and it doesn't need to look like any one thing. But for any of these renderings, those match exactly with these bird's eye view plans. And so if you want to kind of see the plant combinations or relatively the spacing, you can do that and understand it from here. And for all of these, you can also download a full PDF package that would allow you to print the individual pages that you want. If you print them on 11 by 17 paper, you can actually measure with a ruler, and 1/8 of an inch would be 1 foot to really refine your plant spacing and go from there. So maybe you have a small yard, you can still do all of this. You don't need a huge space. And even if you don't have room for a single tree, you can still work with native plants and still really make a contribution. And so in addition to that, we have some helpful lists. I have a list of my very favorite plants for this area, and most of those are native. There's a few exceptions, but the vast majority of them are. Hedges, plants on these lists that work for hedges and screens, work well for sloped areas. If you have a dry stream bed and you're wondering what to plant next to or in it, that can kind of take some inundation seasonally. We have that. And as we find need for a list for something, we're slowly building out more of those. And then the final section is sort of a catch-all for all our different resources. So all of these things that I sort of touched on, when we shifted to all online workshops due to COVID, it became very easy to record them. And so now we have a YouTube channel and a playlist that hosts all of these. And so we have a basics class that really gets you going, also tells you all about the current turf replacement rebates available in the region, an entire 3-hour class really going into the details about native garden design. Once you have your design, installation and establishment of native gardens, even if you're hiring a contractor, it's kind of good to know what you're in for, pruning and maintenance. And then if you go to the full YouTube playlist, from there, you can see all of our different topics. So we have one, favorite plants for Inland Valley Gardens. It's kind of that same list you saw, just me going through all of my top plants and how I like to use them, what's great about them. Rainwater harvesting for home landscapes, a class mostly focused on native plants, but also talking about other elements. So how do you set that up, not just for visual design, but for maximum bird, butterfly, and pollinator habitat, removing your lawn, converting over to a different irrigation system from a turf irrigation system, and a few of our top workshops in Spanish as well. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We also teach lots of these topics in free live workshops that are much more interactive here at the Waterwise Community Center. They are on Saturday mornings, usually 2 a month. And if you click here, you'll go directly to our event page where you can see our upcoming schedule and register. And if you're interested in learning how to do this, this is actually the perfect time, because fall is the best time to plant native plants, late fall, early winter. And summer is still an okay time to kill your turf. Summer is the best time to kill your turf. And so if you know you're going to do it, you can start working on killing your turf. We have a detailed workshop with all the tips and tricks you need to know if you're doing that part yourself on our YouTube playlist. And then we teach in person a series kind of in order. Starting next month, I'll be teaching the California Native Design class, and then we'll give you some time to let that soak in and work on your design. Then I'll be teaching the installation and maintenance class, and so on and so forth. Everything is free and open to the public, no matter where you live. And then there's some additional information on here, whether it's details about different approaches to water capture, working with wildflowers, what kind of mulch or ground cover you should use, materials and how to build pathways, where to buy these materials and plants in our local area, and how to visit our garden. And so that, in a nutshell, is kind of the online hub. We are working on many more projects for this as we speak. I am getting close to finishing recording and editing a series of videos that really walk you through, even more broken down than our workshop, step by step, how to do the whole design process, including very detailed information on how to draw out your yard onto graph paper at scale, how to do all of that drawing process and everything. And so, kind of getting towards the very end, I'll just go through one last series of images, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, let's get back into the slideshow. And so this is kind of the stuff that you'll be able to learn, whether you want to go into it right away with YouTube videos, or you want to join us for in-person workshops. And oftentimes I use my house in Pomona that we moved into in October of 2018, so not too long ago, as kind of the detailed case study, because I was able to take lots of pictures, and I can tell you, what I've learned and what's worked and even what hasn't worked in some cases. And so if you want to get that series of videos when they're released, be sure to sign up for our newsletter, get that announcement. But kind of that series of videos will walk you through taking measurements, drawing it out on graph paper, doing an assessment of your site and setting your goals, and then using that to start to create a design, which you don't need to be artistic or a genius. And in most cases, design is best done through a very kind of logical process of setting goals, understanding your site, getting it down on paper so you don't forget it, and then kind of building out something that very logically connects to your goals. And in the end, it will be beautiful. And so kind of going through planning. And here's the process that took place for my front yard. I got the turf replacement rebate, started in January 2019. It was really in March by the time we were planting. We kind of did the sheet mulching part or the cardboard mulching part backwards for a very specific reason, but not how you would normally do it. But here, this is the phase where all the plants for the front yard are in the ground. Don't bother planting plants from really large, expensive sizes. The smaller ones always grow faster. And most people think this is never going to grow in. Did our biodegradable weed berry with recycled cardboard boxes. And this is the front yard at about 6 months, starting to turn into a garden. One of the things I love about Claremont is that people are fans of signs in the front yard. And so if you work with native plants, there's a number of really cool signs that if you're the first one on the block, you can really let the neighbors know what's happening there. There's a great one about California native plants available from the California Native Plant Society. And we also got our yard certified as a wildlife habitat, which you can do with the self-certification document and a small donation to the National Wildlife Federation. So in our neighborhood, we are the first garden to look anything like this. And so this is in our front yard and kind of lets people know what the heck is going on. And so at about 1 year, trees still need to grow quite a bit, but we have the color, we have the smell, we have a resident hummingbird who lives in the front yard and a whole cast of other characters that come and go. And these beautiful, beautiful moments of plants. And it changes throughout the year, which is lovely. So in the early spring, there's a certain look. And then in the summer, that look changes. And my partner and I love this really lush, wild look. But if that's not for you, you can keep it more open and still get many of the benefits. And, realistically, the summer is the ecological equivalent of our winter. And so kind of embracing that and finding the beauty in that kind of quieter time. And our front yard isn't really set up. There are some areas other than this that look great right now. But I just wanted to show you kind of the same view and embracing the fact that it's quieter, but there's still some color, still smells amazing from some of the plants. But if that summer look is really important to you, here's some shots from the backyard where even the beauty of the plants in their dormancy, this is a sage that I've watered like once this summer, are still beautiful, or working with some plants from other parts of California or other species of plants that really thrive in the late summer and the peak heat. and whatever you want. So if you want a little meadow area, you can have that. This is a little native carex meadow, but once there's a little bit of shade that's grown in, I only water this every 2 to 3 weeks. And I just kind of embrace the fact that it's gold in the winter, or sorry, in the summer. And it's just such a lovely place to be. It truly is, if you build it, they will come. And so, this can really be done anywhere, even right in the middle of the city or the suburbs. And habitat as well as species numbers are in decline. And one of the great things about working with native plants in our urban areas is our areas are right there. We want to have something planted there. And there are so many environmental and sustainability issues that it can seem kind of daunting or hard to find our way to be involved with. And there are some that, maybe it's very important to vote or to advocate or to donate. But this is something that right here in our neighborhoods or in our yards or right outside our doorsteps, we can do something about. If you put this plant in your yard, you will provide monarch butterfly habitat, and you can couple that with other ones and have your own monarch sanctuary. And that's just one example that I use because monarchs are in the news a lot these days, but it really, really extends so much farther beyond that. And then it's great to always remember to balance that with our yards are also habitat for people. And our yards are going to seem easier to care for, almost magically, if we also build them as comfortable spaces that we enjoy spending time in. And with the native garden, it also becomes a fascinating space and a space that you are going to want to spend your weekend mornings out there with your coffee. And then some of the weeds just kind of get pulled when you're doing that and pruned back. And it's really a whole different relationship that's built between you and your landscape than a conventional landscape really could ever provide. And so with that, I could go on forever, but I want to make sure that we have time for questions and discussion. And so we can get into that. And I will just leave this up with some of the links of some of our resources that I talked about. And I talked about mostly the Waterwise Community Center's resources, but there are so many other great organizations, California Botanic Garden, you all know about, projects of the California Native Plant Society. And so if you look at our YouTube videos or join us for in-person workshops about these topics, I'll share a lot of those other resources as well. Okay, so with that, are there any questions? We can jump into that portion of it. And yeah, I don't know, do you want to facilitate that part of it, or how do we want to do this?
Yeah, either way, we could let people jump in. Nancy Hamlet, it looks like you have your hand up. I'm not sure if that's with a question or maybe from Scott's question at the beginning. Let's see if, it looks like Evangelos has a hand up there.
Yeah, my name is Evangelos Valianatos. I'm in Clermont. I want to thank you very much for the presentation, and I have a question. Have you spoken to any of the city councils, either Pomona or Clermont, to adapt what you're doing for the city itself, for their own landscaping, and then spread the information to the rest of the citizens of the town?
Not for Pomona and Claremont. I've done some presentations where some of the city council members have come to presentations that we've done at the Waterwise Community Center, and I've had some follow-up conversations with them. And I've worked some with cities and also some with special districts within our service area on some projects like this. In terms of design or in terms of helping like their planning departments with plant recommendations and things like that. But there is a lot more work to be done. And should I get any invitations to speak about it, I will be showing up. So just for example, tomorrow I'm doing a lunchtime talk for an association of facilities managers that work in the Inland Empire area. So, trying to spread the word at all levels. The city councils, I think, are really important, but also even at a smaller level, some of the people who are just, this planter is going to need to get redone. maybe we can get some native plants in there, and hopefully that can be successful and build up from there as well. I think is just as important.
Yeah, I mean, this is the time of climate change, and it's a dramatic effect on California as well as for the rest of the country. So you have the universities, you have churches, you have all sorts of institutions that they spend a lot of money and they do sorts of landscaping, all of them, so they could benefit from your input. So
Yeah, absolutely. One of the projects that is probably not going to make it, unfortunately, there's just so much to do, and what to choose on to my priority list for this year. But I'm hoping next year is to take that palette concept and to kind of create a series of palettes for that larger scale. So thinking about things like churches, homeowners associations, things like that. One of the new regulations, which is actually in effect now for at least a year, but that went into effect before really there were any enforcement guidelines put out, which are coming, is what's defined as non-functional turf, which is basically turf grass, as long as it's not watered by recycled water, that's not like a park, a play area, a sports field, cannot be watered in California for at least a year. There are some provisions in that to allow trees and woody plants that are long-term to still continue to be watered so they don't die. What that actually looks like, we're kind of collectively figuring out at the moment. But that's a huge opportunity to try to advocate for getting these sorts of landscapes into those non-functional turf areas that just never need to return to being turf.
well, thank you very much for your efforts. Keep up the good work.
Great. And then Scott, I think Marcella, Nancy, and Dorothy have questions. So Marcella, do you want to go next?
Thank you. I really enjoyed looking at the pictures. I can't wait to check out the website for selecting plants. I was thinking about watering and two questions about water. First of all, you mentioned, of course, they need more water in the beginning to become established. What would afterward, which you say about once every 3 to 4 weeks, but what is it in the beginning to get established? And then the other question I had is that I did like your dense plantings as well. And does that require a different kind of water irrigation plan? Is drip at that point not as effective, or what are the considerations there?
Yeah, great questions. So the answer for kind of watering in that establishment, which in our area is usually about a year if you plant in the fall, winter, or very early spring. In the vast majority of cases, I do a deep soak once per week for about the first year, and then start quickly tapering off from there. Saying kind of like 5 to 12 days based on your soil is more accurate, but once a week, it's rare that I deviate from that, and that seems to work out very well in the vast majority of cases. For the water situation, there are a few ways to go. Drip done using the inline drip tube, where the emitters are already kind of embedded, usually every 1 foot into the line, kind of internally inside, and it just looks like a hole. Done in a grid, so that it's almost like it's raining throughout the entire root zone of that area, but it's just directly on the surface, would be the way to do that with drip irrigation. Depending on the design and layout, though, I am a big fan of high efficiency spray systems, sometimes called high efficiency rotating nozzles, which are concentrated streams of water that still come off of a sprinkler. And they've been engineered why they're high efficiency is because it's rotated concentrated streams, you don't get the misting of a traditional sprinkler system. From an engineering standpoint, and I am a huge nerd about this, I've gone way into it. From an engineering standpoint, they're not quite as, quote, efficient as drip, but as long as you don't have, shrubs blocking the stream, and normally when I teach people how to do it, they're kind of mounted a little bit higher. they are also much lower maintenance, and they don't have the problem that even the best drip systems have, where lines can get cut and people don't see, or like in our property right now, we have some areas where we have drip. We have a combination of those two techniques, but squirrels are eating through the drip lines to get, and so every time that happens, we have line breaks, and we're losing a lot of that efficiency of the theoretical drip. So there's no perfect way to do it. You know, if I was in between the two and I was in Claremont right now, and with the regulations, and having drip means you can kind of water with what you need to do, where spray is much more regulated. I have a feeling that the intent is not this specific kind of spray on native gardens, but you know, that might sway the way I go. But we have a class coming up about that I'm teaching, called Retrofitting Turf Irrigation Systems for Waterwise and Native Gardens. And we explore and pull out parts and kind of show you hands-on and talk about the considerations for both of those systems that I'd recommend. So encourage you, if you want to learn more, come check that out.
Then I think we have Nancy next.
Hi, Scott. It's Dick Haskell. Nancy's sitting next to me. Sorry. I have a quick question. I think it's a very common question. But have you designed spaces with native plants, selecting for that space a number of plants that will be flowering, let's say, in the winter or fall, and some that may actually even be flowering in mid-summer?
Yes.
I know there are some. Is that easy to do or hard to do? Is it tough?
That's actually easy to do with natives. Winter is a little bit more restricted, but the manzanitas, there are many manzanitas that bloom in the winter, and a few other things. And when you look at actual months, like some of the spring bloomers will actually kind of get started in what's calendar winter. But then in the summer, one of the great things about gardening exactly where we are is that we have so many great California native desert plants. And when our local native plants, like our sages, for example, that a lot of people grow, which I love, kind of slow down a lot and stop blooming, some of the desert plants in my yard, like desert willow, are just in full bloom. Some of the mallows from the desert are in full bloom right now. And they'll take all of that summer heat, even reflected heat situations, and with just a little bit of water, they just turn that into flowers, because that's really when they're in their element. And they're also they can take very little water and make great use of it in the summer, because they evolved in places where they get not much water, but it comes in summer monsoonal rains. And so we can kind of use that in our gardens to balance out those seasons and really amplify both visually, but also our habitat value year round. So absolutely. And on the Inland Valley Garden Planner, both in the plant profiles, it's really easy to see what season they bloom in. But also, if you're looking within any of those templates, there's an actual bloom calendar that we made. And so you can see each of the plant in the template and kind of the block out. And so specifically, because the blooms are so important, for example, our pollinator garden template, we made sure that there were plants that in our local gardens are going to be blooming in every season of the year.
Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.
Great. And then Dee Dee or Dorothy?
Thanks. Scott, that was awesome. I loved the presentation and all of the additional information that we can follow. I think we'll definitely want to come down to the demonstration garden at some point. I wonder if you could expand on whether or not we in our area have any problematical or pernicious invasive or non-native plants. You know, in the way that kudzu exists in the South, or other examples of really outrageous invasives.
Yeah, we have quite a few. Public enemy number one is fountain grass, or sometimes called feather grass. It's a pennisetum. Is the genus. and you have seen it around. It is all over the place in Claremont. There are some spots on Foothill, some businesses that feature them prominently in their landscapes. And they spread very aggressively. They're also local in wild areas and here and there. There are efforts to get them banned from local nurseries, and some nurseries have signed on. The problem with that is that they are aesthetically, they are so beautiful, and they actually look beautiful year round, and they grow very quickly. And so not only are they sometimes planted, but even in urban areas, they will seed very aggressively into a landscape. But then when they show up, whether it's a homeowner or oftentimes I'll see like a landscape maintenance crew, they won't cut them back. Whether it's an assumption that that was intended, and so that they're able to spread more. But those are the Pennisetum is really our biggest issue, because they can take over whole hillsides. They grow extremely aggressively, so they can actually displace native plants which can't grow as quickly, especially after a fire event. And they will change the entire fire ecology, because they put on a lot of biomass and then they dry out in a way that our native grasses don't produce as much dry biomass. And so it can actually increase, even though we are in fire adapted landscapes, the presence of that species alone in a wildland area can actually increase the fire frequency and fire risk in a way that further kind of exacerbates native species being able to repopulate. So that's the number one. The number two in urban areas, I would say, is Bermuda grass, which is just a big part of having to deal with it as we collectively are trying to remove more lawns and put in native gardens or whatever is going to come next. Is that not just grass, but specifically Bermuda grass single-handedly makes it more work, but it can be done. It can be done. So those, I mean, the answer is yes, but those are really, especially in our local area, kind of the big ones.
Great. And then we have a question in the comments, and then Jennifer Jaffe just put her hand up, but really quick in the comments, Ross Pringle asks sort of what your opinion is about carrotwood trees, and maybe some that are already existing.
Carrotwood trees. Okay. There, in terms of planting a new tree, there are so many more interesting and exciting and lower water and kind of better habitat trees than carrotwood trees. But if you have an existing carrotwood tree that is like the sole shade tree in your landscape, that becomes a little bit more iffy. If it was me personally, and I had a vision of this dynamic native landscape that was going to replace it, depending on the size and age, if I was doing a major landscape project, I might decide to go ahead and bite the bullet and remove it if I had a vision for something else, and then use as much of the actual like larger branches and logs and wood of the carrot tree to build something interesting that will support habitat, in my garden, or just leave the logs around, which could help, and kind of harvest that and make use of it on the site rather than just sending it to a green waste dump. Or you can go another route and decide that you're going to keep that because the ecosystem service that that's providing, even though it's not a native plant, is shade. And whether that's for you and you build your space to sit and enjoy your garden underneath that, or whether it creates a shadier microclimate where then you can grow some part shade loving native plants that you wouldn't have a shady spot for, or for many years before that. There can be other ways of utilizing that. It's likely, if you're thinking about switching to a native landscape, going to want to require a bit more water than the rest of that landscape. During establishment, it'll be fine, but as you taper off the rest of it, but there's easy ways to do that. You could have a different irrigation valve with some little drip line underneath it, or just if you're watering your native landscape every 3 to 4 weeks, then occasionally in the summer season, it might not even matter in the winter. You maybe just set up a soaker hose, connected to a hose, in between your main waterings, and that might be all you need to do as well.
Great. And then our last question with Jennifer. Jennifer, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
I had to come late, and But I really appreciate the presentation because I have a very low knowledge base, lots of enthusiasm, no knowledge, easily go into tilt. And I like the way as you progressed, I'd go, oh, it's getting too hard. And you'd go, but then we have this. And I think, oh, this is getting too hard. You go, but we have this other thing. And so I really appreciate that. The two comments I want to make, you may have answered because I was at another meeting at the beginning, so feel free to just say so. I'm very concerned about, I'm in Claremont, about the trees not getting watered as people are not watering their lawns. And that a lot of the information that's out there about how to water is inaccurate, and so I'm curious what really aggressive things are being put out there to help people understand the need to water trees no matter what, to keep them and the many virtues of them, even the non-native ones. That it's net gain to keep them well-established trees at this point. My second concern is about hearing that as climate change progresses, that the plants that are appropriate to this environment now are actually going to be the plants 100 miles south or something. And so I wonder whether with all the resources that you provide, there's a way for us to understand which are the plants that are going to be appropriate for 20 years from now, given that it's not going to be the same climate here. We're going to be more like places to the south or east. I don't know.
Okay, a lot to unpack there, but I think I have some short thoughts for you, and both really good topics to bring up. The tree watering thing, I couldn't agree more. That's why one of the guys on my team, who is our real irrigation expert, and myself put together a workshop that we just taught here last Saturday called something like watering your landscape during drought, where we focused on that and we presented what we consider to be the best method, among other things, for hand watering trees and shrubs through the drought, and actually not just kind of randomly doing it, but understanding based on, for example, your tree, the size of it, like how many gallons of water should you actually be putting out onto that tree, and what's a reasonably practical way to do it. Using a soaker hose, you can just connect to a hose, but actually knowing when you've applied that much, and then kind of how to check. And so we had a really enthusiastic group who are sort of our guinea pigs, and we made them kind of, okay, are you following this? Is everyone with us? What are the questions? And that went over pretty well. So we are hopefully going to be finding time in the next couple of weeks to turn some of those key topics into YouTube videos. And should we do that, we can definitely reach out and share those through Sustainable Claremont, and then Sustainable Claremont can share those far and wide. But also in the meantime, the nonprofit based in Los Angeles, Tree People, has some pretty good resources as well. And I don't know, I do see that
talking about native plants
is on the session, so he might have more as well. I know Drew is very knowledgeable on the topic, so you have a local expert. But no pressure, Drew, or if he's multitasking. So I can also say on the second question, which is true, our climate is changing. One of the things that I like about working with not necessarily any plant native to Southern California, but once you get into it a little bit more and you start learning about some of the native plants, is that they have weathered changes in climate before. It doesn't mean that individual plants don't get stressed, but I have in some of my longer classes about native plants, I show there's climate change, and there's also been droughts. But especially when it comes to like weathering, 100+ year droughts, we have tree ring records that show that these species have evolved and lived through that. Now, increased heat temperatures, urban heat island effect, those all play a role. But some of these species you will also see growing in species that are great garden plants, you will see growing in full southern exposed sheer rock faces out of tiny little cracks and doing okay. So to me, when I think about what species really should be we translating to our urban landscapes, where at least for the next few years, we probably will be able to provide some amount of care to. Some of those are going to be great. I don't necessarily think it's time to start landscaping like it is Arizona. However, I will say that for my hot microclimates already, some of the plants from the California desert make great garden additions here. And that is a way that when I'm thinking about design for those reflected heat, real urban heat island effect kind of things, sometimes those are some of my go-tos, kind of chaparral and desert plants. And desert plants came up when we were talking about flower season. But for example, one of my favorite desert plants, desert willow. And we have one of those in our parking lot here at the Waterwise Community Center, full south and west facing sun at the edge of an asphalt parking lot. And a couple of years ago, it was 113 degrees ambiently. The reflected heat off the asphalt has got to be way higher than that. It was perfectly happy and flowering through all of that. And so we have choices, and we have really beautiful choices as well. And so if that's a significant concern, maybe you'll be motivated to do some more research. But absolutely. And if you do like to hike, one of the things that my partner, who's also a horticulturist, and I are often doing is, it's like every year we hike slower, and partially because we're not quite as young as we used to be, and my back's not as quite as good as I used to be, but mostly it's because we are looking so carefully at the plants growing on, especially every new hike that we go on, and all of the different microclimates and what's living in reflected heat and what needs a little bit more shelter beyond just what you can read on a list. And so the lists are very useful. But if you're so motivated and you want that level of kind of
how'd the other one get?
with your garden,
Get
a lot out of that and really have that feedback into a whole other level of depth and planning for things like that.
Oh, yeah, the brother, they're supposed to crack.
Sorry, Scott, that should be taken care of now. I had to mute. Can you hear okay?
Yeah, no worries. It was getting to be a long answer, so it was probably time for me to stop talking.
No, I didn't mean to do that. But we are past our time. And just really quick, I just wanted to speak to Jennifer's question because I had that on my list as well. We're definitely, when we're doing tree plantings with cities we work with and with West Coast arborists, planting a different palette of trees, at least for some segment of the plantings that we're doing, to sort of experiment to see what will thrive as the climate is warming. So I had that same question about, as you're planting, these gardens, if that's something to consider. So that'll be sort of an interesting thing to follow moving forward. But Scott, this was such a great presentation, and I always love the presentations where it feels like we have like our marching orders and we can make some real progress at home, right? And like really, make an impact locally in our community, in our neighborhood, in our home. So thank you for all these great resources. We recorded this, so we'll put it up on YouTube and send it out to our network. And if you have those workshops coming up, I'd love to spread the word on those so we can, get more people planting these great gardens in their yards. So thank you so much. And thank everybody for attending tonight.
You're very welcome. So you said, your homework. So for those of you who haven't logged out yet, here's your homework. If you have a space in your yard that can accommodate it, and you can look at the size, right plant, right place, go to California Botanic Garden and plant, if you don't have them already, one of 3 plants. Plant either a California native sage of some sort, a California native buckwheat of some sort, or a California native, what's called a penstemon of some sort. And so from those 3 plants, you have many different sizes and adaptations. There will be one you could love. And that's, some of them fit in pots, and that could be a great place to start. And someone typed in milkweed as well. If you have a place where you could put some narrow-leaf milkweed, do that as well if you could find it as a nursery. And if you see it at a nursery and you can afford to, just buy one. And if you don't find a place for it at home, give it to someone who wants to plant it. That's a great suggestion. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me. It was great to connect with a new group.
All right, great. Thanks.
And yeah, come to our workshops and check us out in person.
You got it, Scott. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much, and have a great rest of your night.
Good night, everyone.